Welcome, tech enthusiasts. Today, we're diving into the world of virtualization with a comprehensive guide on how to set up and use VirtualBox. This powerful tool lets you run multiple operating systems on your computer without any risk to your main system. Let's jump right in. Before we start downloading and installing VirtualBox, we need to make sure your system is ready for virtualization. First, let's check if virtualization is enabled on your computer. Right-click on your taskbar to open the menu and look for Task Manager. Give that a click. Once Task Manager opens, look for the Performance tab at the top and click it. Now, in the left panel, make sure CPU is selected. Look at the bottom of the CPU information panel. You should see a line that says Virtualization. On my system, it shows as Enabled, which means we're good to go. If you see Disabled instead, don't worry, we can fix that. You'll need to restart your computer and enter your BIOS settings. The exact process varies depending on your computer, but typically you'll need to press a key like F2, F12, or delete during startup. For Intel processors, look for settings labeled Intel Virtualization Technology or Intel VTX. If you have an AMD processor, look for AMD V or SVM mode. Once you find it, enable the settings, save your changes, and exit BIOS to restart your computer. Now that we've confirmed virtualization is enabled, let's get VirtualBox installed. Fire up your preferred internet browser and head to your favorite search engine. In the search bar, type VirtualBox and hit enter. Look for the first result that leads to virtualbox.org. That's our target. Once you're on the VirtualBox website, you'll see a prominent blue download button front and center. Give that a confident click. On the following page, look for the Platform Packages section. Since we're using Windows, we'll click on the Windows Hosts download link. Your browser will ask where you want to save the installer file. Choose a location you'll remember, like your Downloads folder. Now, before we install VirtualBox, we need an ISO file containing an operating system. You probably already have in mind what you want to run on a VM, but I am, for demonstration purposes, going to get Linux Mint. It's a perfect choice for beginners because it has a familiar Windows-like interface and comes with all essential software pre-installed. Open a new browser tab and search for Linux Mint. Click on the first result that leads to linuxmint.com. Once you're on the Linux Mint website, look for the download button and give it a click. Scroll down until you see the Cinnamon Edition. This is their flagship version that most users prefer. While there are other editions available, Cinnamon offers the best balance of features and ease of use for newcomers. Scroll down a bit more until you see a list of download mirrors. These are different servers hosting the same file. You can choose one that's closest to your region for faster download speeds, or just use a global mirror if you're not sure. Click on your chosen mirror to start the download. While we wait, I should mention that Linux Mint is just one of many operating systems you can run in VirtualBox. You could also try other Linux distributions, or even test different versions of Windows if you have installation media for them. Now, let's locate those files we just downloaded. Open up your File Explorer and navigate to your Downloads folder. You should see both the VirtualBox installer and the Linux Mint ISO file. We're ready to start the installation process, so let's double-click that VirtualBox installer to get started. When you launch the VirtualBox installer, you'll be greeted by the Setup wizard. Click Next to begin the installation process. On the following screen, you'll see the license agreement. Take a moment to read through it if you'd like, then select I accept and click Next to proceed. Now we're at the feature selection screen. Here, VirtualBox presents you with several important components to install, including USB support, networking features, and Python integration. The default selections are typically perfect for most users, providing everything you need for basic virtual machine operations. Unless you have specific requirements, leave these choices as they are and click Next. You'll now see a network interface warning. This is important. The installation process will temporarily reset your network connections. Make sure you're not in the middle of downloading anything important or participating in online meetings. When you're ready, click Yes to continue. Next, you might see a message about missing dependencies, specifically mentioning Python Core and Win32 API. These components are primarily used for advanced Python-related features in VirtualBox. For basic virtual machine operations, you won't need these right away. Click Yes to proceed. You can always install these later if you need them. The next screen shows shortcut settings. This determines where VirtualBox will create shortcuts for quick access. The default settings work well for most users, so go ahead and click Next. Now you'll see the final installation confirmation screen. Click Install to begin the actual installation process. VirtualBox is quite efficient with its installation. It usually only takes less than a minute. While we wait, keep an eye on the progress bar at the bottom of the window. Once the installation completes, you'll see a checkbox that says Start Oracle VM VirtualBox after installation. Leave this checked, it'll save us a click, and hit Finish. And there we are. Welcome to VirtualBox. Before we jump into creating our first virtual machine, let's take a quick tour of the interface. It's designed to be intuitive, but knowing where everything is will will make your virtualization journey much smoother. First, look at the left side of the window. This is your tools sidebar, and it's command central for all your virtual machine operations. It's where you'll find tools for managing your virtual machines, handling extensions, and adjusting various configurations. At the top of the window, you'll spot the toolbar. Think of this as your quick access panel. It has buttons for important tasks like adjusting preferences, importing or exporting machines, creating new virtual machines, and adding existing ones to your library. The largest part of the window is your main workspace. Right now, it's showing a welcome message, but this area adapts based on what you're doing. When you're setting up a virtual machine or checking system logs, this is where all the action happens. Now that we're familiar with the interface, let's create our first virtual machine. Look up at the toolbar and find the New button. It's time to put that Linux Mint ISO file to use. Click New, and the Create Virtual Machine wizard appears. This is where we'll configure the basic settings for our virtual machine. In the name field, type Mint x64. I like to name my virtual machines with the operating system name and architecture. It makes them easy to identify later. You might want to add modifiers too, like dev or test if you're creating multiple versions. Below the name, you'll see a folder path showing where VirtualBox will store your virtual machine files. The default location works perfectly fine for most users, but if you need to store it somewhere specific, like on a different drive, you can change it here. Next, we need to tell VirtualBox where to find our operating system installer. Click the small drop-down arrow next to ISO image and navigate to where you save the Linux Mint ISO file. Select it and click Open. You'll notice that after selecting the ISO, VirtualBox has automatically filled in the type and version drop-down menus. It's pretty smart about recognizing operating systems. Unless you have a specific reason to change these, leave them as they are. VirtualBox has chosen the optimal settings for Linux Mint. Now, let's look at the Skip Unattended Installation checkbox. This feature determines whether VirtualBox will automate the installation process or let you handle it manually. The unattended installation can save time by automatically configuring basic settings, but I prefer to skip it so we can see and control every step of the installation process. It's a great way to learn how everything works. In the unattended install section, you'll see fields for username and password. These credentials will be used to log into your virtual machine once it's set up. For our testing purposes, we can leave these at their default values, but make sure to remember the password. You'll need it later. Moving down to additional options, you can specify details like the host name and domain name for your virtual machine. There's also an option to run the installation in the background, though we'll leave that off for now. Next up is the Guest Additions section. This is an important feature that really enhances your virtual machine experience. Guest Additions improves graphics performance, enables shared folders between your host and virtual machine, and adds other useful features. Let's toggle this on. If you don't see the ISO file automatically selected, we'll need to locate it manually. Navigate to your Program Files folder, then look for the Oracle folder, followed by the VirtualBox folder. Inside, you'll find vboxguestadditions.iso. Select that file and click Open. Now let's toggle the hardware section to set up our virtual machine's resources. First up is base memory. This determines how much RAM your virtual machine can use. While Linux Mint can run with 2 GB of RAM, I'm going to be generous and allocate 8 GB since my system has plenty to spare. Remember, you should never allocate more than half of your total system RAM to avoid performance issues on your host machine. Next, we need to set the number of processors. While one CPU core is enough for basic testing, more cores mean better performance. I'll assign 4 cores to this virtual machine. Just like with RAM, make sure to leave enough processing power for your host system. Below that, you'll see the Enable EFI checkbox. EFI, Extensible Firmware Interface, is a modern boot system that some operating systems require. However, Linux Mint works perfectly fine without it in most cases, so we'll leave this unchecked. Let's toggle the hard disk section to configure our storage settings. By default, VirtualBox suggests creating a new virtual hard disk, which is exactly what we want for a fresh installation. You'll see the hard disk location and size field. Linux Mint recommends at least 25 GB for comfortable use. You can always increase this if you plan to install lots of applications or store large files. For the hard disk file type, VirtualBox defaults to VDI, VirtualBox Disk Image. This is perfect for our needs. It's VirtualBox's native format and offers the best compatibility. You'll also notice an option to pre-allocate full size. When left unchecked, your virtual disk will grow dynamically as needed, only taking up as much space as it actually uses. While pre-allocation can offer slightly better performance, dynamic allocation is more space efficient, so we'll stick with that. If you happen to have an existing virtual hard disk from a previous setup, you could select Use an existing virtual hard disk file and browse to its location. But since we're starting fresh, we'll keep the default option to create a new disk. With all these settings configured just the way we want them, we're ready to create our virtual machine. Click Finish and watch as VirtualBox creates your new virtual environment. Our virtual machine is ready, but there's one important setting we should adjust that wasn't offered during the initial setup: the video memory, or VRAM. To access these additional settings, select your virtual machine from the list. Right now, we only have one, but you might have several in the future. Then click the Settings button in the toolbar. While we're in the Settings menu, let's explore some other useful configurations. In the General section, click on the Advanced tab. Here you'll notice options for shared clipboard and drag and drop. By default, these are disabled, but we can change both to bidirectional. This means you'll be able to copy and paste text between your host computer and the virtual machine, as well as drag files back and forth. Really handy for transferring data. Moving down to the System section, we can modify the boot order. Let's demonstrate a small optimization by unchecking the floppy disk from the boot order. While it won't make a huge difference in modern systems, it's good to know how to adjust these settings. Now, here's what I was really looking for: the display section. For some reason, VirtualBox defaults to just 16 megabytes of video memory, which is quite limited. Let's crank that up to the maximum of 128 megabytes. This will allow our virtual machine to handle higher resolutions, including 4K display that I am running now. While we're in the display settings, let's also enable 3D acceleration. This feature lets our virtual machine tap into our computer's graphics hardware for smoother performance, especially with modern desktop environments that use fancy visual effects. Feel free to scroll through and explore any other settings you might want to adjust, but for now, we're good to go. Click OK to save our changes. Now for the exciting part. Let's fire up our virtual machine. Click the green Start arrow button in the toolbar. As the machine boots up, you might notice the display is quite small if you're using a 4K monitor like I am. Don't worry, we'll fix that once Linux Mint loads into its live session. From the boot menu, select the first option to start Linux Mint. Give it a moment to boot up, and here we are. Let me quickly adjust the resolution to HD and scale it up. I could set it to 4K resolution, but then we'd need to go full screen, and you wouldn't be able to see the VirtualBox menus and controls. There, that's much better. Now, something important to note. We haven't actually installed Linux Mint yet. Instead, we're running what's called a live session. This means we're running the operating system directly from the virtual DVD, our ISO file, which lets us test everything out without making any permanent changes. If you do want to install Linux Mint permanently, you'll find an install shortcut right on the desktop. But for our VirtualBox tutorial, this live session is perfect. It demonstrates that everything is working correctly. After all, you might be planning to install a completely different operating system in your virtual machine. Just before we wrap up, I want to share a personal recommendation. If you're ever curious about trying Linux, Linux Mint is an excellent place to start. It's designed to be incredibly user-friendly, especially for people coming from Windows. The interface will feel familiar right away, and it comes with all the essential software pre-installed. Plus, it has one of the most helpful and welcoming communities in the Linux world, which is invaluable when you're learning something new. As you can see, Linux Mint's layout is quite similar to Windows. You've got your Start menu in the familiar bottom left corner, a file explorer for managing your documents, a terminal for advanced commands, a settings panel for system configurations, and the software manager, which is particularly interesting. Let me show you that quickly. The software manager is like an app store, but everything here is free. You can browse through thousands of applications, from productivity tools to games, and install them with just a few clicks. It's one of the features that makes Linux Mint so user-friendly. Now, let's explore the menus at the top of the VirtualBox window. There's a lot of useful functionality hidden up here. Starting with the File menu, you'll find three main options. There's Reset All Warnings. This comes in handy if you've checked. Don't show this again on some warning messages, but want to see them again. Then there is Close, which, as you'd expect, closes the virtual machine window. And there's Preferences, where you can adjust global VirtualBox settings like where your virtual machines are stored, how your keyboard and mouse interact with VMs, and update settings. Moving on to the Machine menu, this is where most of the action happens. The Settings option we used earlier is here, though you'll notice most of these settings are grayed out while the virtual machine is running. This is normal. Many hardware-related settings can't be changed while the VM is active. One particularly useful feature here is Take Snapshot. This lets you save the current state of your virtual machine, like taking a photograph of everything running at that moment. It's incredibly useful when you're about to try something risky. If things go wrong, you can always roll back to your snapshot. Let me demonstrate by taking a snapshot now. In the right-hand side of your window, you'll see a progress bar showing the snapshot being created. Once the progress bar completes, your snapshot is saved and ready. Now, let's continue exploring the other options in the Machine menu. The Session Information option shows you real-time details about your virtual machine, including how much of your computer's resources it's using. File Manager helps you transfer files between your main computer and the virtual machine. If you ever run into problems, the Show Log option can be invaluable for troubleshooting. You'll also find some power-related options here. Pause temporarily freezes the virtual machine without shutting it down, useful when you need to free up resources temporarily. Reset is like pressing the reset button on a physical computer. Use it sparingly. ACPI Shutdown sends a proper shutdown signal to the virtual machine, just like when you shut down a real computer through the operating system. Take a look at the right side of these menu items. You'll notice keyboard shortcuts listed as Host plus something. The Host key is a special key that VirtualBox uses to ensure keyboard shortcuts don't interfere with the guest operating system. You can see which key is configured as your host key in the bottom bottom right corner of the virtual machine window. By default, it's usually the right control key, but you can change this in the settings if you prefer a different key. Next up is the View menu, which gives you lots of options for controlling how your virtual machine looks and behaves. Let's start with full screen mode. Clicking this expands your virtual machine to fill your entire screen, making it feel just like you're working on a regular computer. There's also something called seamless mode, though you'll notice it's grayed out right now. This is because we haven't installed guest editions yet, but when it's available, it lets your virtual machine windows blend right in with your host system's desktop. It's pretty neat. Scaled mode is particularly useful. It lets you resize the virtual machine window while maintaining the proper aspect ratio, kind of like zooming in or out. Speaking of window sizes, Adjust Window Size automatically resizes the VM window to match whatever resolution you've set inside the virtual machine. Auto Resize Guest Display works the other way around. As you resize the window, it automatically adjusts the virtual machine's resolution to match. This makes for a much smoother experience when you're switching between different window sizes. If you need to capture what's happening in your virtual machine, the Take Screenshot option lets you save an image of the current display. For more extensive documentation, there's even a recording feature that can capture video of your virtual machine activity. You can also customize your workspace by toggling the menu bar and status bar visibility. And if you're working with multiple monitors, the Virtual Screen 1 option lets you configure display settings specifically for the active screen. Moving to the Input menu, this is where you control how your keyboard and mouse interact with the virtual machine. The Keyboard option lets you send specific key combinations directly to your VM. This is particularly useful for key combinations that might otherwise be caught by your host system. Mouse integration manages how your mouse moves between your regular desktop and the virtual machine. The Devices menu is your control center for managing hardware and shared resources. Here you can manage optical drives, audio devices, network adapters, and USB devices. You'll also find options for setting up shared folders between your host and virtual machine, configuring Clipboard settings, and managing drag and drop functionality, all of which make transferring files much easier. There's also an option to insert the Guest Edition CD, which we mentioned earlier. Installing this really enhances the virtual machine's performance and adds some great usability features. Finally, we have the Help menu, your go-to resource for VirtualBox assistance. It provides quick access to documentation, community forums, and the VirtualBox website, where you can find answers to common questions and get support when needed. If you're curious about which version of VirtualBox you're running or want to check the licensing information, you'll find that under About VirtualBox in this menu. Now, let me shut down this machine so I can show you some final settings and features. Give it a moment to complete the shutdown process if necessary. With our virtual machine powered off, let's explore some additional management features. First, click the menu icon next to any virtual machine to reveal a drop-down menu packed with useful options. The Details option gives you a comprehensive overview of your VM's configuration, everything from memory allocation to storage settings, all in one convenient view. Remember that snapshot we took earlier? You can find it in the Snapshot section. This is where you manage all your saved machine states, making it easy to roll back changes or maintain different versions of your setup. The Log section is incredibly useful for troubleshooting. It keeps track of everything that happens during your VM sessions. Activity shows you a history of recent operations, while File Manager provides an easy way to transfer files between your host system and virtual machine. Now, let me show you a couple more important features. Right-click on any virtual machine to bring up a context menu with additional management options. One particularly useful feature is Clone, which creates an exact copy of your virtual machine. This is perfect for testing new configurations or software without risking your original setup. When cloning a VM, you first name your new machine and choose where to store it. Then you'll need to select a clone type. You have two options here. Full clone creates a completely independent copy of the virtual machine. It's like having a completely separate computer with all the same software and settings installed. Linked clone, on the other hand, shares disk space with the original machine, making it faster to create and more space efficient, but it needs the original VM to function. Under Snapshots, you can choose to clone just the current machine state, or select everything to include all your saved snapshots. Including all snapshots is particularly useful when you want to preserve your entire testing or development history in the new clone. In additional options, you can fine-tune settings like keeping the original disk names and hardware UUIDs. Once you're happy with your choices, click Finish to start the cloning process. And here's our newly created linked instance. Since it's a linked clone, it's notably smaller in file size because it's sharing resources with the original virtual machine. Now, if you ever need to remove a virtual machine you're no longer using, just right-click on it and select Remove. You'll be presented with two options. Delete all files will completely remove the virtual machine and all its associated files from your hard drive. Use this when you're absolutely sure you won't need the VM or its contents anymore. Remove Only is a bit more conservative. It just takes the VM off your VirtualBox list, but keeps all the files on your disk. Perfect for when you might want to bring the VM back later. And lastly, let me briefly go over the Tools section, which contains some really powerful features you might need down the line. First up is the import function, which lets you bring in existing virtual machines that have been saved in OVF or OVA formats. This is particularly useful when someone shares a pre-configured virtual machine with you. Its counterpart, Export, lets you package up your virtual machines as appliances, making them easy to share with others or transfer to different computers. Let's explore the Tools menu by clicking its icon. The first option you'll see is Welcome, which takes you back to that friendly introductory screen where you can find basic help and guidance. Just below that is Extensions, where you can enhance VirtualBox's capabilities by adding support for things like advanced USB devices or networking features. The Media section gives you a comprehensive overview of all your virtual hard disks and ISO files. Think of it as your virtual storage manager. Next is the Network section, which is invaluable when you need to set up or modify custom networks for your virtual machines, especially useful when you're testing network configurations or running multiple VMs that need to communicate with each other. If you're working with cloud services, the Cloud option helps you seamlessly integrate and manage cloud-based virtual machines. And finally, the Activities section provides a quick overview of everything you've done recently in VirtualBox, making it easy to track your actions and check logs. This Tools menu really puts the power in your hands to fine-tune and control your virtual machine environment. And for the most part, with this beginner-level guide, you're all set to rule over many virtual machines. And there you have it, tech enthusiasts. You've successfully learned how to set up and manage virtual machines using VirtualBox. If you found this tutorial helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tech tips and tricks. Until next time, happy virtualizing.